Well, I'm so glad to be here and really appreciate the board's support to do the research here. So I'm hoping that y'all find value in this, and please provide your feedback. Y'all can hear me. Y'all hear? So much of the work that we've done definitely is very applicable to what y'all experienced this past year. I think definitely even the work that Nick talked about with regards to the seeding rates and the populations, and I have so much data that I could share that I'm not sharing today just because of the sake of time. But a lot of that really is a big issue, and what he discussed with regards to his stand counts, looking at probably 50 to 60% of the planted stand, was not just isolated to this area. This is something that I saw all across the region. But what's very interesting, as something that I have not just seen this year, it's every year. So for the last 6 years, I've done variety trials all across the northern panhandle, and I see anywhere from 30 to 70% of the drop seed actually make a final stand, which is pretty significant. And as I look at planting rates and using 50,000 just as an average, the day you put your planter on the ground, you're losing anywhere from $30 to $50 depending on the cost of that bag of seed. So it really does become a very important consideration. How are you managing those populations? All right, so we had 3 projects that we worked on this past year with the Water District. There was the cover crop project, which, as Nick said, is on the west half of this pivot, just to the east, just to the east of the gin. And we also had an extension, or not extension, a video education extension and Water District collaboration that we dubbed the Cotton and Conservation Program. I don't know if anyone saw those videos on social media, but we tried to provide timely video reports from fields across the region. We'll talk about that. And then also the cotton irrigation demonstration. So we have some really great data from all 3 projects to talk about. So of course, as Nick discussed, just the value of having on-farm research, and that is what I really love about having the opportunity to work here. It is definitely on-farm, and it's very applicable to y'all. It's large scale, and we are coordinating with Stan, so everything we do, we try and coordinate with his existing practice. And of course, I do think that when we do this, the farmers, with whether it's the work we're doing here or it's our other on-farm work with our other cotton variety trials, they really do appreciate the opportunity because it provides our cooperators the opportunity to see how varieties perform under their management scenarios. And also I do think that having the larger on-farm research can lead to quicker adoption. So it really does become a win-win having the research here with the Water District and doing that. But it also complicates farming for the farmer. So with that, really do appreciate Stan Spain and all of his patience with this. As Nick said, especially this past year when we looked at some of our cotton stands, I would have understood any farmer saying, I'm terminating this. This is not a good stand, I'm done. But because it was part of a research project, he agreed to keep those plots, and it really did turn out to be better than we anticipated. One of the things that I have learned this year with regards to cotton more than any year is patience. And I really do think that in this region, we just have to be patient. It's amazing what we can do with a 20 to 30,000 plant stand. When we only see these populations, or 50% of what we plant come up. Ideally, we want a better stand and we plant more so that we can have a higher stand, but it does become complicating. So we thank Stan for all of his patience. So I'm going to jump right into our cover crop project. When we started our cover crop project, it was in response to questions from just the farmers in this region. And there are lots of questions about cover crops and soil health, especially in a semi-arid, water-limited production region. And so we all know the value of using cover crops. It's all across popular press magazines. Of course, in more humid regions and in the Midwest, cover crops have been used very well for years. But there are still questions about the adoption of cover crops in this region. And so when we look at these questions, we want to know, do the benefits of the cover crops hold true for the Texas High Plains? Of course, in semi-arid regions, we are looking at either dryland cropping systems or limited irrigation. And so our soils are going to be much more susceptible to the negative effects from a monoculture cropping system. And that is why there is value in incorporating those cover crops, so we can diversify the system, we can diversify the soil microbiology, the rooting structures. So there's a lot of benefit to it, but again, there's questions about it in this region. And so, of course, it's because of our environmental extremes. And it really does go back to the water. Are we going to have enough water to manage a cover crop as well as our primary economic crop so that we can minimize soil degradation? And it does become even more important as we start to incorporate cotton into our system, because we all know cotton is a low residue to no residue crop. And if we were running into it, or we do hear of producers who are interested in continuous cotton production, and that is very concerning because of the soil degradation that can occur with that. So there's value in maintaining that corn crop to maintain the residue and maintain the soil health, but then also just how is it going to work in this system. And so, of course, again, when we talk about the limitations of a cover crop, it is because our precipitation is significantly less than our environmental demand. When we actually look at the potential ET for this region, we're sitting on anywhere from 90 to 100 inches of water per year that would evaporate from a freestanding body of water. And so, of course, our annual precip is anywhere from 16 to 20 inches in a normal year. And so we're already sitting in a deficit, and that is why it becomes so challenging to get not only just dryland crops established, but of course manage those cover crops in these systems. So ultimately the question became, are cover crops viable with a limited water supply? So we wanted to actually look at this in what would become more of a common cropping system in this region. We're increasingly seeing more corn and cotton rotations, and this was a picture of the field that we established the cover crop study on just right after corn harvest. So as Nick said, we have a lot of residue out there, and I know that Stan has questioned how he's going to manage his residue moving forward, but there's a lot of value in that residue. And so as we look at this, it's not just establishing the cover crop in this system, but let's also keep in mind the value of this residue and compare that residue to these cover crop systems. So when we talk about, of course, corn residue, we have the soil organic matter that's in there, we're talking about our increasing our soil organic matter with our residue also. So it's not just the cover crop that's going to increase our soil organic matter, but that residue has a lot of value. It's going to help improve our soil structure, our aggregate stability. As that residue breaks down, it can increase soil organic matter, which leads to greater water holding capacity, reduced wind erosion, and ultimately that is going to help improve the water use efficiency that Nick spoke about. And also, of course, with the nutrient cycling. When we look at the nutrients that are in a ton of residue, for every ton of residue out there, you have 17 pounds of nitrogen. You have 4 pounds of P2O5, 34 pounds of potash, and about 3 pounds of sulfur. So that's pretty significant. Of course, we know one of our greatest challenges is decomposition. And it takes a lot of time for those nutrients to actually become available. But nevertheless, there's quite a bit of nutrients that are tied up in that residue that you have. So if we just kind of look at some of the math, rule of thumb math with residue, we have on average 60 pounds of residue per bushel. And so our 2018 corn crop out here, we had right at 239 bushels per acre of corn yield. So if we looked at that 239 times 60, we had right at 14,000 pounds, or a little over 7 tons of residue sitting on the surface. So that's quite a bit of residue. And so when we look at 7 tons of residue and the amount of nutrients that are available, that are tied up in that residue, we had 122 pounds of nitrogen, 29 pounds of P2O5, 245 pounds of potash, and 22 pounds of sulfur. So that's quite a bit of nutrients that are tied up in that residue. But the problem is they're immobilized. They are tied up. And so they're not going to become available until that residue starts to decompose. And that decomposition process is dependent on, of course, the type of residue. And with our corn residue, we're talking about a residue that has a very high carbon to nitrogen ratio. So we have about 33 parts of carbon to every part of nitrogen that's in there. So if we actually looked at a residue for a legume crop like soybeans or something, or alfalfa, we'd probably have anywhere from 7 to 10 parts carbon to part nitrogen. So it would decompose very quickly. So that is why, it takes a long time for that to decompose. Also, it's temperature, air temperature and soil temperature. And our air temperature, we get to the summer and it is warm and it's usually dry. So of course, in limited irrigated environments, that's going to further slow the decomposition down. And then also soil moisture and oxygen levels. So that's kind of a catch-22. Of course, in a saturated environment where it's saturated, you're going to have very low oxygen, and that's going to slow the process down. But in a dry environment, that's also going to slow that process down. Soil pH, and then also the soil microbial community. And again, in a dry environment, we're going to have less microbial activity naturally, and so that's going to slow that degradation down. But that residue is also providing us a lot of benefit. It's our cover. It's going to minimize the evaporation from the soil surface and really help with increasing the water use efficiency in that field. So just pointing out that as we're going in and looking at the cover crop, that's important, but we need to keep in mind the value of this residue in our system. Because if we're coming in and we have many systems where farmers are coming in and they're baling that residue because they can turn around and sell it for, I don't know, $12 to $15 per ton, or is anyone getting higher than that right now? But they take all that residue off and sell it, but then they're coming in and planting a cover crop. We're kind of fighting ourselves on this. So we need to keep in mind the value of that residue in these systems. And this is just a very simple depiction of that process when we look at actually the mobilization and immobilization process with our nutrients and how they become mineralized. So with our corn residue, as I mentioned, we have a lot of nitrogen that's tied up, but as that residue decomposes, it's going to start releasing those nutrients. So, we talk about, the cover crops and the value of the cover crops in the water-limited systems, but also, do the cover crops increase the mineralization rate of the corn in a semi-arid, limited water environment? And so that's really part of this question too. It's not just increasing yield and increasing the organic matter, increasing the soil physical properties, but are these cover crops actually helping increase this mineralization rate and freeing up a lot of those nutrients that are tied up? And when Nick is talking about the nitrogen use efficiency and improving that, this is actually part of that story too. So theoretically, those cover crops do have a lower corn to nitrogen ratio than corn. And so those cover crops will decompose quickly. They're going to feed those soil microbes. And they will increase the microbial activity, and that will increase the mineralization rate of that corn and free up those nutrients. So we have the data, and kind of like Nick was saying again, there's a lot of data, not everything's analyzed. So I'm not talking about this data today, but in the future, that data will be coming. And so it's pretty exciting to see. So when we actually look at the objectives of this project, we have, of course, quantify the soil water dynamics, and ultimately, that is our number one objective. What is happening with the soil water? Does the cover crop water use impact the yield of our cash crop? And does the incorporation of a cover crop increase the soil water storage such that the water use efficiency is improved for that cash crop? Also, we will be quantifying changes in soil physical and chemical properties, as well as quantifying the cost or benefit of that cover crop to the system. And so today I'm just going to focus on the soil water component.